Valve is a company that is known for a lot of things. I mean, they're the same company that maintains Steam and the Source engine. They made some of the most beloved video game franchises of all time, and they are physically incapable of counting to 3. There you go, there's my obligatory Valve can't count to 3 joke. You are now legally obligated to laugh. The thing with pretty much every media company is that not all of the projects that they work on will end up seeing the light of day. A lot of the time these projects often have most of their main aspects fully complete, like their story or their gameplay, but for one reason or another they end up getting cancelled and they are never seen of or heard of again. Valve is no different. In fact, they have quite a few projects that they never completed and as a result they never released them. Some of them were even being made by completely different companies. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about some of Valve's cancelled projects and basically just explain to you what they were and describe some of the possible reasons they may have been cancelled. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. I hope you enjoy it. So I don't need to explain what Half-Life is. You already know what it is and you've probably played it at some point. One thing you may not have known, however, is that there was actually a port for the game released for the PlayStation 2 in late 2001. One thing that this port is well known for is its exclusive co-op campaign known as Decay. Although this is the only console port that we ever got of the original Half-Life, it wasn't actually meant to be that way. There was actually meant to be another port of the game for Sega's last console, the Dreamcast. Much like the PS2 port, this version of the game would have also had its own exclusive campaign, that being Blue Shift. Though since the Dreamcast port was cancelled, Blue Shift would eventually make its way as an expansion for the PC version. The Dreamcast port would have also had an online multiplayer mode, which would have been provided on the second disc. The port was scheduled to release sometime in June of 2001, however, only a few weeks prior, the company responsible for publishing the port, Sierra Entertainment, announced that it was officially cancelled. It was most likely cancelled because in that same year, Sega announced that they would be discontinuing all support for the Dreamcast, including its online service, SegaNet. Although the Dreamcast version was sadly never released officially, there have been some late-stage development builds that have been leaked and published online, and there's even been a mod for the PC version that aims to recreate the entire experience of the Dreamcast version. But still, as it stands today, the only official port of Half-Life on a console is the PlayStation 2 version. This one was actually one of the first ideas that Valve ever had for a game, and as such it was also one of the first times they've ever cancelled a game. This game was known as Prospero, and it was actually being developed around the same time as the original Half-Life. The game was meant to be a third-person action-adventure game that would have been set in a science fantasy world. The main protagonist of the game was someone named Aleph, and she would have had access to psionic powers that the player could use during combat. Prospero's level designs were much different than Half-Life's, whereas Half-Life was pretty much entirely linear. Prospero would have had much bigger and more open levels that would have emphasized exploration. However, some of the ideas that were originally made for Prospero were eventually taken over by Half-Life, and as a result, Prospero would eventually evolve into a multiplayer game, which would have had a mix of both official and user-created levels that could be accessed through the main hub world. However, just before the release of Half-Life, Prospero was cancelled. Although Prospero would never see the light of day, Gabe has said in a 2006 FAQ that he'd actually like to return to the game shortly after the release of TF2. But that was in 2006, right now it is 2023 and we've still heard nothing of Prospero. This one is honestly the most interesting to me. So you've probably heard of a game company known as Telltale Games. They're known for making more narrative-focused games, where the player makes choices and depending on what choices they make, certain events in the story will change. Their most iconic and beloved game, inarguably, is The Walking Dead Season 1. The thing that's interesting about this game is that it wasn't originally meant to be about The Walking Dead. No, in fact, it was actually meant to be a narrative-focused game based off of Left 4 Dead. This was only revealed to us in 2022 when a documentary was made to celebrate the 10th anniversary of The Walking Dead Season 1.
Really great stuff and a lot of cool tricks. And
a very first Walking Dead prototype, which actually was for a different zombie thing that ended up turning into The Walking Dead. The first conversation was actually with Valve, and it was about what if we did a narrative side story in the universe of Left 4 Dead. That was when Sean and Carl had started this prototype of the sort of the boiling pots or spinning plates, and
that was a text game. That was a text game.
This wouldn't be the only time where a Left 4 Dead spin-off story was pitched by another company, as it's widely believed that the movie Zombieland was originally meant to be a movie based on Left 4 Dead, but Valve didn't give the studio the rights to use the Left 4 Dead IP. I honestly kinda wish we got a more narrative-focused Left 4 Dead story. I think it would have been interesting to see a more grounded take on its universe. But because the universe is cruel, we never got any official Left 4 Dead spin-offs. Hey look, I'm giving you a 2 for the price of 1 deal here. As this entry suggests, there were 2 VR games that were cancelled by Valve. The first of these is Portal VR, which is, well, Portal, but in VR. This one was cancelled for, well, obvious reasons. The second one, however, is a little bit more interesting. This project was simply known as Borealis. As the name suggests, it would have involved the Borealis. It is a ship created by Aperture Science that is mentioned quite a few times in the Half-Life 2 episodes. It's mentioned so many times because the Resistance believes that the ship houses some sort of technology that can help in the fight against the Combine. The cancelled VR game would have had you exploring the ship for some currently unknown reason. One thing that was interesting about this game, however, is that the ship would constantly jump back and forth in time. It would jump between the time of the 7-hour war and the time when Half-Life 2 Episode 2 is set. The game would have been written by Mark Laidlaw, and it had a fairly small team of developers working on it. However, it never really garnered any interest from people within the company, and because of that, it was cancelled. Although Portal VR would have been disorienting as fuck, it would have been interesting to see the Borealis game come out. So you know earlier when I said that the Telltale Left 4 Dead game was the most interesting entry? Well, guess what? I lied. This entry is actually, in my opinion, the most interesting one. This game that I'm talking about was simply known as Return to Ravenholm, and as you probably guessed, it would have focused on the town of Ravenholm from Half-Life 2. The game was being developed by Arcane Studios, the same studio behind such games as Dishonored and Prey. The main protagonist of the game would have been Adrian Shepard, who was actually the main protagonist of Half-Life Opposing Force, but he was unfortunately put in stasis by the G-Man and has never been in the series ever again. The plot would have revolved around Adrian waking up in the town of Ravenholm in some sort of mental institution. The game would have let you walk around for a little bit until Father Gregory bursts into the room and closes the door behind him. He would then explain to you that he's actually been injecting head crab blood into himself to try and build some sort of immunity. But of course, this would end up backfiring and start mutating him into some sort of creature. The game actually had a central gimmick, that being that the player had the ability to manipulate electricity, which they could then use to solve puzzles or set traps for enemies. The zombies in this game would have also been quite different. Instead of the classic slow head crab zombies that you see in literally every Half-Life game, these zombies would have looked and behaved more like the ones in Left 4 Dead. There are more things I could talk about, but those were just the ones that I found to be particularly interesting. The game actually made it quite far into development, but Valve believed that they had explored Ravenholm enough in Half-Life 2, and as such they decided to cancel Return to Ravenholm, which seemed disappointing to many of the developers on the project. Although the game was cancelled sometime in 2007, there was tons of gameplay footage and information released about it in a no-clip video. Although we may never actually be able to play this game, this video is really the next best thing. And that is the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why not consider giving it a like and maybe even subscribing? They're both completely free and you can always change your mind later. I also want to thank you all for not only getting me to 1000 subscribers, but for also getting my Gmod Myths and Rumours video to 100,000 views. I really do appreciate it. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again soon.